The fluorescent lights of Busan University Hospital's 6th floor hummed with the kind of sterile indifference that made death feel routine. Adaeze Nwosu stood in the empty hallway at 2:47 a.m., her back pressed against the cold white wall, tears streaming down her dark cheeks in silent rivers she could no longer control. Mrs. Kim had died alone. Adaeze had promised to be there when the old woman took her last breath. But Dr. Yang had pulled her away to handle an emergency C-section, and by the time she'd returned, scrubbing blood from beneath her fingernails, Mrs. Kim's bed was empty. Sheet pulled over her face. No family. No hand to hold. Just the monitor's flat lines screaming into the void. "I'm sorry," Adaeze whispered to the ghost that still lingered in her mind. "I'm so sorry, Omugo-em, my child." That's what Mrs. Kim had called her in those final weeks, mixing broken Korean with the Igbo words Adaeze had taught her during the long nights when pain made sleep impossible. Her shoulders shook. She pressed her palm against her mouth, trying to muffle the sobs that wanted to rip free. Crying was dangerous. Crying meant weakness, and weakness meant someone might ask questions, like why a Nigerian volunteer was working 16-hour shifts in a hospital that didn't officially employ her, like why her visa had expired 8 months ago, like why she existed in the shadows of South Korea's immigration system, invisible and illegal and one wrong move away from deportation. The ward door clicked open. Adaeze froze, scrubbing her face with the back of her hand. But no one emerged. She heard it then, the labored mechanical breathing, a ventilator, and beneath it, a voice, barely audible. "Don't hide it." She turned. Through the gap in the doorway, she could see into room 604, the private suite where the VIP patients stayed, the one she'd been forbidden from entering because Dr. Yang said people like her weren't qualified to touch people like them. A man lay in the adjustable bed, bathed in the blue glow of half a dozen monitors. Even from this distance, Adaeze could see he was dying, not the slow fade of old age like Mrs. Kim. This was something brutal and efficient. ALS, maybe, from the way his limbs lay too still against the white sheets. His chest rose and fell with the ventilator's rhythm, but his eyes were locked on her. Dark, sharp, absolutely awake despite the late hour. "You're crying," he said, his voice distorted by the breathing tube, but still clear enough to cut through the silence. For her, the woman in 612. She should Adaeze's
leave,
breath caught.
walk away, pretend she hadn't heard, but something in his gaze held her there, pinned like a butterfly beneath glass. Her voice cracked. "I wasn't there. I promised I'd be there. Promises are shit." The words came out harsh. But his eyes, something cracked in them, something ancient and tired and profoundly sad. "I've made 100, broken them all." She didn't know what possessed her to step closer. Maybe it was the nakedness of his pain. Maybe it was the way he looked at her. Not as a thing to be used or feared or deported, but as another human being drowning in the same dark water. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, but this time not to Mrs. Kim's ghost, "for whatever you lost." For the first time in what looked like a very long time, Park Ji-hoon's carefully constructed mask shattered. "My wife," he said, and the ventilator couldn't hide the way his voice twins.
broke.
They were 6 weeks early. I was in Tokyo closing a deal. By the time I landed, he stopped, started again. They died alone, all 3 of them, because I chose money over. He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Adaeze moved without thinking, crossing the threshold into the forbidden room. Her hand found his, cold, unresponsive, the muscles already failing, and squeezed gently. "They knew you loved them," she said, the lie coming easy because she'd told it to 100 dying patients before. Love doesn't need presents to be real. Bullshit. But his fingers, the 3 that still worked, tried to curl around hers. "You don't even know me. I know you're dying." She said it plainly, without the soft euphemisms doctors used.
I know you're alone, and I know what that feels like. Something shifted in the room. Beeped steadily. The ventilator hissed and clicked, but between them, in the space where their hands met, something changed. Pela primera vez en 5 años, Park Ji-hoon felt something other than the crushing weight of his own guilt. He felt seen. "What's your name?" he asked. Adesi Nwosu. Nigerian. Igbo. She smiled, small and sad. "How did you know?" "Your accent." "The words you use." His eyes studied her with the intensity of a man who'd built a tech empire from nothing. "You're not here legally." Her hand started to pull away, but his fingers, those 3 treacherous fingers, tightened with shocking strength. "Stay," he said. Not a command, a plea. "Please. Just stay." She should run, should disappear into the night shift's chaos and never look back. But the way he looked at her, like she was the first real thing he'd seen in years, made her throat close. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Park Ji-hoon didn't know it yet, but in that moment, his entire world tilted on its axis. 3 weeks. The doctors had given him 3 weeks before the ALS stole his ability to breathe even with the ventilator. 3 weeks before his lungs filled with fluid and drowned him from the inside out. 3 weeks to make peace with a life built on money and empty of meaning. But when he looked at this woman, this stranger with tears on her face and warmth in her hands, he made a decision that would change everything. "I want to hire you," he said. Adesi blinked. "What?" "As my private nurse. 24 hours a day. Name your price." "I can't. Dr. Yang would never—" "I'll pay your debts." He said it with the casual certainty of a man who'd never worried about money. "All of them. The people who smuggled you here, the loan sharks, everything. And I'll get you legal status, work visa, whatever you need." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Why?" "Because you're the first person who's looked at me like I'm human in 3 years." His eyes burned into hers. "And because I don't want to die alone." The machines beeped. The ventilator
in the silence
hissed. Between them, Adesi heard her father's voice. The one from before the soldiers came. Before the blood and the running and the terrified scramble onto a cargo ship that brought her to this foreign land. "Onye Watara Oji, Watara Ndu. He who brings suffering, brings life. I have a brother," she said quietly. 15. He needs school fees, and my mother needs medication. Done. Ji-hoon's voice was final, absolute. "Bring me the numbers. I'll transfer the funds tonight." She stared at him, this dying stranger offering her miracles with the same casual ease other men ordered coffee. "You don't even know me," she echoed his earlier words. "No," he agreed. "But I know what loneliness looks like, and I know I only have 72 days left to matter to someone." Adesi's breath shuddered in her chest. Outside, the hospital continued its endless dance with death. Monitors beeped, gurneys rolled. Families whispered prayers in languages that all meant the same thing: please, let them stay. But in room 604, something else was happening. 2 broken people, separated by oceans and language and every conceivable difference, found each other in the darkness. 72 days. Adesi repeated softly. 90, if I'm lucky. His smile was bitter. "Will you stay?" She should say no. Should run. Should protect herself from the inevitable grief of watching another person slip away. But when she looked at him, really looked, she saw the same thing he'd seen in her. Someone drowning. Someone desperate. Someone who just needed one person to hold their hand in the dark. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll stay." Park Ji-hoon closed his eyes, and for the first time since his wife's funeral, he didn't feel like he was falling into an abyss. He didn't know yet that his son would try to kill her, that his family would wage war, that loving this woman would cost him everything he'd built. All he knew was that when her hand tightened around his, something inside him, something he'd thought died with his wife and sons, flickered back to life. Outside the window, Busan's lights glittered like fallen stars. The city never slept, never stopped, never cared who lived or died within its concrete embrace. But in that room, At 3:14 a.m. on a Thursday in October, two people made a choice that would shake the foundations of one of Korea's most powerful families. Daejeon Wosu agreed to stay, and Park Ji-hoon decided he wanted to live long enough to make it matter. The penthouse overlooked Haeundae Beach like a glass and steel fortress, 53 floors above the city that had made Park Ji-hoon a billionaire. Stood in the marble foyer, her single duffel bag clutched against her chest, and tried not to hyperventilate. This wasn't a home. It was a museum. 16-foot ceilings, original Rothko on the walls. Furniture that probably cost more than her entire village back in Enugu State would see in a decade. "Your room is down the hall," the lawyer, Lee Tae-ho, said, his English crisp and professional. "Mr. Park
Medical
has the
equipment
master
was
suite
installed
yesterday. The day nurse will brief you on his medication schedule." "Day nurse?" Adesi's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I thought, you'll handle nights and personal care." Lee's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Pity, maybe. Or warning. "Everything else, the other staff will manage during business hours." Business hours. As if dying was a
Ji-hoon's
9 to
voice
5
crackled
job. Through an intercom she hadn't noticed. "Lee, stop scaring her." And a daze. His breathing was labored, each word a fight. "Come here, please." She found him in a room that had been converted into a medical suite. The view stretched to the horizon, but Ji-hoon wasn't looking at it. He was propped up in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hissed, keeping his failing body
looked worse
functioning.
than
He had at the hospital. The overhead lights were unforgiving, highlighting the hollows beneath his eyes, the way his skin stretched too tight over his bones. ALS was eating him alive from the inside out. "You came," he said, and the relief in his voice made her chest ache. "You paid off $200 million in debt." Daze set her bag down carefully. "And wired money to Lagos for my brother's
mother's
school
medication.
fees. All in 48 hours. She met his eyes. "I keep my promises." "Good." His lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Because I need you to do something for me."
"What?"
"Sing." Daze blinked. "What?" "At the hospital, before you found me crying." He paused for breath. "I heard you. In Mrs. Kim's room. You were singing something. Igbo, I think. I couldn't understand the words, but..." Another pause. "It was the first time I felt peace. In 3 years." Her throat closed. She'd been singing Neka Nwambaize, a lullaby her mother used to hum when the nightmares got bad, when Daze would wake up screaming, seeing her father's blood on the walls, hearing the gunshots that stole him. "I can't," she started. "Please." That word again. Not a command. A plea from a man who had everything except the one thing he needed. "I'm paying you $50 million a month. Consider it part of the job description." 50 million won. 6 weeks of work would cover her mother's surgery. 3 months would let her brother finish university. 6 months, if Ji-hoon lived that long, would give her a future she'd never dared dream about. "Okay," she whispered, "but I need to... You need a bath first. The hospital smell, I can't move my legs anymore." He said it flatly, without emotion. "Or my left arm. Dr. Yang says I have maybe 6 weeks before the paralysis reaches my lungs." 6 weeks. Not the 90 days he'd mentioned at the hospital. Something inside Daejeon cracked. She'd known he was dying, had known it the moment she saw him. But hearing the timeline, the casual certainty of his approaching death, made it real in a way that hollowed her out. "Then we don't waste time being afraid," she said, reaching for the medical supplies Lee had mentioned. "I'm going to help you sit up. Tell me if anything hurts." Everything hurts. But he let her slide her arms beneath his shoulders, marveling at how light he was, how fragile. This man who'd built an empire, who'd revolutionized AI medical diagnostics, who had enough money to buy small countries, reduced to skin and bone and failing nerves. The bath was clinical, professional. Daejeon had done this 1,000 times with patients in Lagos, in the refugee camps, in the bowels of cargo ships where people died in darkness, and she'd whispered prayers over bodies she couldn't save. But when her hands touched Ji-hoon's skin, when she felt the tremors running through muscles that no longer obeyed his commands, something shifted. He wasn't just another dying patient. He was Ji-hoon, the man who'd listened to her cry, who'd seen her illegal status and offered salvation instead of deportation, who looked at her like she mattered. "Tell me about them," she said softly, washing his back with gentle strokes. "Your wife, your sons." His breath hitched. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Her name was Min Seo. We met at Seoul National University. She was studying literature. I was in the engineering program. His voice went distant. She thought I was arrogant. I thought she was naive. We were both right. Adeze continued washing, letting him talk. The twins, Jae-won and Jae-min, they were early. Min Seo's blood pressure spiked during a business dinner in Tokyo. I was closing a deal with a pharmaceutical company, B500 billion contract. He laughed, bitter and broken. She called me, told me her head hurt. I said I'd be home in the morning. The water ran clear, but Adeze could feel the weight of his grief like a physical thing. By the time I landed, she was in a coma, eclampsia. The babies, they tried. Emergency C-section. But they were too small, 26 weeks. His working fingers clenched against the bed rail. Min Seo never woke up, and I held my sons for 4 hours before they... He couldn't finish. Adeze's own tears fell into the bathwater, mixing with the soap and the sorrow. She understood loss, understood the way it carved you hollow and filled the empty spaces with guilt. "I'm sorry," she whispered in Igbo. "Ndo, OBM. I'm sorry, my heart." "What does that mean?" "It means you're not alone." She helped him back into clean clothes, her hands steady despite the trembling in her chest. It means grief is better shared than carried solo. She didn't know what possessed her to do it. Maybe it was the vulnerability in his eyes. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like she was the only real thing in a world gone hollow. But when she settled him back against the pillows, Adeze began to sing, "Neka nwambaise, onyekagi mama." The Igbo words flowed soft and low, a lullaby about a daughter of Mbaise, beautiful and blessed. Her mother had sung it during the bombings, during the terrible journey across the desert, during the weeks crammed in a ship's cargo hold where 3 people died of dehydration before they saw South Korea's coast. Ji-hoon's eyes closed. His breathing, labored and mechanical, began to slow, deepen. The lines of pain etched into his forehead smoothed. For the first time since his diagnosis, Park Ji-hoon slept without nightmares. Adeze sat beside him, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, and felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. This was supposed to be a job, money to save her family, nothing more. But the way his working hand had reached for hers during the bath, the desperate gratitude in his touch, had carved itself into her heart in a way that terrified her. She couldn't afford to care, couldn't afford to see him as anything more than a dying man who'd bought her time and safety. But when Ji-hoon stirred in his sleep, whispering "Don't leave" in a voice raw with need, Adeze found herself squeezing his hand. "I won't," she promised the darkness. "I won't leave you." What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that Park Jae-sung, Ji-hoon's son from his first marriage, was standing in the hallway outside the room, listening, watching through the crack in the door as his father, the man who'd never shown him affection, who'd chosen work over family, who'd let Jae-sung's mother drink herself to death from loneliness, looked at this Nigerian stranger like she was the sun itself. Jae-sung's hands clenched into fists. His father had $3 trillion, enough to buy countries, to reshape economies, to give Jae-sung everything he'd been promised since birth. And he was giving it all to her? To some illegal immigrant who'd probably seduced him with... No, this wouldn't stand. Jae-sung pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the one he needed. A private investigator. The kind who specialized in finding dirt on people. The kind who didn't ask questions. I need everything on Adaeze Nwosu, he said quietly, his voice cold as winter. Nigerian. Working at Busan University Hospital.
And I need it yesterday.
Adaeze continued singing, unaware of the danger coiling around her like a noose. She didn't know that loving Park Ji-hoon would nearly kill her. All she knew was that when he opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked, seeing past the fear and the immigration status and the ocean between their worlds, something inside her shifted, he whispered. And Adaeze realized with dawning horror that she'd already fallen for this dying man who'd saved her life by ending his own in the most generous way possible. The machines beeped. The sun set over Haeundae Beach. And in the penthouse high above Busan, two broken people found something neither had expected. Hope. But hope, Adaeze would soon learn, was the most dangerous thing of all, especially when Park Jae-sung had just declared war. The call came at 3 a.m. on Adaeze's fourth night in the penthouse. She jerked awake from the couch where she'd been dozing, Ji-hoon's monitors providing a steady rhythm she'd learned to sleep through. But the sound cutting through the darkness wasn't medical equipment. It was her phone. A Lagos number. Her heart stopped. Chukwudi? Her brother's name came out strangled. Chukwudi, what's wrong? Adaeze. His voice was young, terrified, speaking rapid Igbo. They came to the house. Men with guns. They said you owe them money. That you took Mr. Park's money, but the original debt. Ice flooded her veins. What men? Chukwudi, are you safe? Is Mama? They took me. His voice dropped to a whisper. I'm in a car. They said if you don't pay $200 million by Friday, they'll... A hand slammed against something. Chukwudi cried out. Then a new voice, cold and accented. Miss Nwosu, your brother is very pretty. It would be a shame if something happened to his face, or his hands. He wants to be a doctor, yes? A laugh, cruel and casual. Hard to perform surgery without fingers. The phone went dead. Adaeze stood frozen in the darkness, her entire world collapsing. Ji-hoon had paid the smugglers. She'd seen the wire transfer. $200 million, just like he'd promised. But these men, these weren't the smugglers. These were the gangsters who'd subcontracted the smuggling operation. The ones who didn't care about paperwork or promises. The ones who saw Nigerian refugees as disposable inventory. And they had Chukwudi. Adaeze? She spun. Ji-hoon was awake, his eyes tracking her face in the dim light from the monitors. What's wrong? He asked. And even through the ventilator, she heard the sharpness. The CEO who'd built an empire on reading people. Nothing, But the lie died in her throat. She was shaking. Couldn't stop shaking. Tell me. Not a request. A command delivered by a man who was dying but hadn't forgotten how to lead. So she told him. Everything. The smugglers who'd brought her to Korea in a cargo container. The $200 million debt she'd accrued. The gangsters who subcontracted the trafficking operation and saw refugees as renewable resources. And Chukwudi, her baby brother, 15 years old with dreams of medical school, currently in the hands of men who wouldn't hesitate to send his fingers back in a box. Friday, she finished, her voice breaking. They want $200 million by Friday, or they'll... Call Lee, Ji-hoon interrupted. What? My lawyer, Lee Tae-ho. His working hand reached for the call button. Call him. Now. Tell him I need $500 million liquidated by tomorrow morning. Adaeze's breath caught. Ji-hoon, I can't. You think I don't know what they'll do? His voice went hard. Dangerous. I built my company on eliminating middlemen in pharmaceutical distribution. I know exactly what kind of animals run human trafficking operations in Southeast Asia. He met her eyes. Call Lee. Her hands shook as she dialed. Lee Tae-ho answered on the second ring, his voice crisp despite the hour. Miss Nwosu. Is Mr. Park? I'm fine. Ji-hoon cut in through the speakerphone. I need $500 million in cash, untraceable, by 9 a.m. A pause. Then, what's happened? Trafficking gang has Adizi's brother in Lagos. They want W200 million by Friday. And the extra W300 million? Jihoon's smile was cold, lethal. Insurance, and a message. These people hurt what's mine, they pay for it. The possessiveness in those words sent heat flooding through Adazi's chest, even as terror gripped her throat. I'll make the arrangements, Lee said. But Mr. Park, if you're planning what I think you're planning, I'm dying, Lee. What are they going to do? Kill me faster? Jihoon's laugh was bitter. Get me the money, and get me someone who knows how to move it in Lagos without triggering international banking alerts. Yes, sir. Adai stared at him. This man who could barely move, who needed machines to breathe, who had weeks, maybe days, left to live, and who'd just mobilized $500 million to save a teenage boy he'd never met. Why? She whispered. Because you sang for me, he said it simply. Because you stayed when you could have run. Because, his voice cracked, because I failed my own sons. And I'll be damned if I let another child die because the adults in his life were too selfish to act. Something broke inside Adai's. She crossed to him, took his working hand in both of hers, and did something she hadn't done since her father died. She sobbed. Not the quiet, controlled tears she'd perfected, not the professional grief of a nurse who'd learned to compartmentalize. This was raw and ugly and desperate. 10 years of terror and trauma and carefully maintained survival instincts shattering against the reality that someone, finally, was fighting for her instead of extracting value from her. Thank you, she choked out in Igbo. Dalu, Obiem, Chineke Goziagi. Thank you. Thank you, my heart. God bless you. Jihoon's fingers tightened around hers, and Adazi realized she'd never been held by someone who expected nothing in return, who touched her not because she was useful, but because she was seen. We're going to get him back, Jihoon promised, and then we're going to make sure these bastards never touch another refugee again. How? She looked at him, this dying man who could barely lift his head. Jihoon? I can't walk, can't fight, can barely breathe. His smile was sharp, dangerous, but I can still destroy people financially. And Lee knows some very creative accountants who specialize in making criminal enterprises disappear. The next 16 hours were a blur of phone calls, wire transfers, and conversations in languages Adazi didn't speak. Lee arrived at dawn with a man who introduced himself only as Mr. Choi, ex-Korean intelligence, now freelance problem solver. Jihoon directed everything from his bed, his voice growing weaker, but his will absolute. By 2 p.m. they had confirmation. Chukwudi was being held in a warehouse in Lagos's Ajagunle district. The gang was named. The leader identified. The ransom demanded. But Jihoon didn't pay ransoms. He bought the warehouse through a shell company, then reported it to the Nigerian police as a site of suspected human trafficking, then anonymously tipped off 3 different anti-corruption NGOs about the gang leader's offshore accounts. By the time the clock hit Friday, the gangsters didn't just release Chukwudi, they ran, because Park Ji-hoon had used W300 million to systematically dismantle their entire operation, freeze their assets, and put half their leadership on Interpol's radar. And he'd done it from a hospital bed, dying, with nothing but a laptop and the kind of ruthless efficiency that had made him a billionaire. When Chukwudi's face appeared on the video call, bruised but alive, tearful but safe, Adaize collapsed against Ji-hoon's bed and wept until she had nothing left. "Thank you," she whispered for the 100th time. "Thank you. Thank you." Shh. His working hand found her hair, stroking gently. "You're mine to protect now. Anyone who touches you, touches him." Answers to me. He meant Chukwudi. Adiz lifted her head, looking at this man who'd weaponized his wealth not for profit, but for her, and felt something shift in her chest, something terrifying, something that felt dangerously like love. "Ji-hoon, I know what you're going to say." His eyes held hers, that you can't fall for a dying man, that this is temporary, that in 6 weeks I'll be gone and you'll have to build a life without— He stopped, swallowed. "But I need you to know something." "What?" For the first time since Minseo died, I feel alive. His voice broke. You made me want to fight, want to wake up, want to use what little time I have left to matter to someone. He paused. So thank you, Ades, for giving me a reason to care that I'm still breathing. She kissed him then. Not a gentle peck, not the careful touch of a nurse comforting a patient. This was desperate, fierce, a claiming that bypassed professionalism and dove straight into the raw, messy truth of what had been building between them since that first night in the hospital corridor. Ji-hoon kissed her back with everything he had, his working hand tangling in her braids, his breath ragged against her lips, his body trembling with the effort of reaching for something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Connection, desire, life. When they broke apart, both shaking, Adazy rested her forehead against his. I'm falling for you, she confessed in a whisper, and it terrifies me because I don't know how to love someone who's dying. He finished it for her. Then don't think about the ending. Just be here, with me. For however long we have. It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't even a promise of next month. But it was real. And for the first time in her life, Adazy stopped running from what scared her and dove in head first. Okay, she breathed. Okay. What neither of them saw was the figure in the doorway. Park Jae-sung, Ji-hoon's son, stood frozen. Watching his father, who'd never shown him affection, never held him, never looked at him the way he was looking at this Nigerian stranger, kiss her like she was oxygen itself. And in Jae-sung's hand, a text from the private investigator. Found something. Adaeze Nwosu wanted by Nigerian authorities for questioning in her father's death. Suspected involvement in anti-government activities. Can spin this as domestic terrorism connection. Interested? Jae-sung looked at his father. At the woman who was stealing his inheritance. At the future that should have been his, and typed back, very interested. Send me everything. Inside the room, Adaeze and Ji-hoon held each other, unaware that the war was just beginning, and that Park Jae-sung had just armed himself with the one weapon that could destroy them both. The truth, or at least a carefully twisted version of it. Ji-hoon's breathing changed on day 23. Adaeze noticed it immediately, the way the ventilator worked harder, the monitors showing oxygen saturation dropping despite his chest barely rose. The muscles responsible for breathing, already weakened by ALS, were failing faster than even Dr. Yang's bleakest projections. How long? She asked the doctor during his morning visit. Dr. Yang's expression was carefully neutral, professional. Days. A week at most. The paralysis is ascending. Soon it will reach his diaphragm completely. When that happens, he'll drown. Adaeze said it flatly. She'd seen it before. The way ALS patients died, their lungs filling with fluid, their failing bodies couldn't expel. Yes, Dr. Yang paused. Miss Nwosu, you should prepare yourself, and Mr. Park should make arrangements. After he left, Adaeze sat beside Ji-hoon's bed and watched him sleep. 23 days. In 23 days, this man had become her entire world. Secured her mother's medical care, given her legal work status through some lawyerly magic Lee had performed. But more than that, he'd seen her, really seen her, in a way no one had since her father died, and now she was going to lose him. The unfairness of it made her want to scream. You're crying again! She jumped. Ji-hoon's eyes were open, tracking her face. I didn't mean to wake you, she said, scrubbing at her cheeks. Good thing you did. His voice was weaker than yesterday. Each word cost him. I don't have time to waste sleeping. Ji-hoon, there's a drawer. He managed to tilt his head fractionally toward the bedside table. Bottom, blue envelope. Open it. Adaze's hands trembled as she pulled out the envelope. Inside, legal documents, a video drive, and a letter in Korean that she couldn't read. Lee will translate, Ji-hoon wheezed. But the video, watch now, with me. She set up the laptop on a rolling table, positioned it so they could both see. Her finger hovered over the play button. Whatever this is, she started. Just watch. The screen flickered to life. Ji-hoon appeared, but a different Ji-hoon, stronger, seated in a leather chair in what looked like Lee's law office. The timestamp read 3 weeks ago, the day after they'd met. My name is Park Ji-hoon. His recorded self
I'm recording
began in
this of
English.
sound mind and in the presence of my attorney, Lee Tae-ho, and 2 witnesses whose signatures appear below.
Adizi's breath caught. In 23 days, I'll be dead. Maybe 30 if I'm unlucky and the ALS decides to drag this out. Video Ji-hoon smiled, bitter. The doctors give me 60. I'm betting on 3 weeks because my body's been on an accelerated timeline for everything else. Why should dying be different? Her tears
I'm
fell
making
faster.
this recording because I've done something that's going to cause problems. Something my family will challenge. Something that Korea's inheritance laws aren't designed to accommodate. He paused. I'm leaving everything to a Daisy Nwosu. The room spun. Not a portion. Not a generous amount. Everything. Park Technologies, the pharmaceutical holdings, the real estate, the offshore
3.2
accounts.
trillion in total assets. His eyes, those dark, sharp eyes that had first seen her crying, looked directly at the camera. And I'm doing it because in the span of one conversation, Daisy Nwosu gave me something my family never did. She saw me as human. Daisy's hands flew to her mouth. My son Jae-sung will contest this. My ex-wife's family will claim undue influence. The media will call Ades a gold digger, a seductress, worse. Video Ji-hoon's expression hardened. Because everyone who knows me, every board member, every executive, every person who's done business with Park Technologies for 20 years knows I don't make impulsive decisions. This isn't impulse. This is justice. He leaned forward, and Ades could see the same intensity that had built an empire. Ades Nwosu fled political violence, crossed an ocean in a cargo container, survived debt, exploitation, and systems designed to erase people like her. And despite all of that, when she saw an old woman dying alone, she cried. When she saw me dying alone, she stayed. My family sees money. Ades sees people. His voice broke. So yes, I'm leaving her everything. And yes, there will be a legal war. But I've structured this inheritance in a way that makes it nearly impossible to challenge. Ades will have resources, protection, a future. Because she gave me something more valuable than any of that. She gave me a reason to care that I was alive. The video ended. Ades sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, unable to process what she just heard. 3.2 trillion. 3.2 trillion won. That was, she couldn't even conceive the number. It was generational wealth, nation-building wealth, the kind of money that could transform Lagos, fund hospitals, educate thousands. Ji-hoon's working hand found hers, she whispered. Too bad. Ji-hoon, I can't. Your son, your family, my son, Ji-hoon interrupted, forcing the words out between labored breaths. Threw his fiancée down stairs when she threatened to leave. I paid 800 million to make charges disappear. Adaizi's blood ran cold. My family circled Minseo's casket like vultures, was still arguing warm about life
His
insurance.
eyes blazed
with fury
while
that
her
the
body
ALS couldn't dim. They don't deserve. You deserve. But I don't. You sang for me. He said it with the finality of a man who'd made his decision and wouldn't be swayed. You held my hand. You made my last month bearable instead of... He broke off, gasping. The ventilator alarm shrieked. Ji-hoon! Adaze lunged for the call button, but his working fingers caught her wrist. Don't, he rasped. Just listen. The alarm continued screaming. His oxygen saturation dropped to 82%, 79%, 75%. Ji-hoon, I need you to promise. Each word was a battle, a victory against failing lungs. Promise you'll take it, fight for it, use it, to be the person I never was. What person? Someone who saves people instead of building empires on their suffering. His eyes pleaded
begged
with
her
her
to understand what he couldn't articulate through
and
the
suddenly,
machinery keeping him
Adiz
alive.
understood.
This wasn't about money. This was about redemption. Ji-hoon had spent his life accumulating wealth while ignoring the human cost, had missed his wife's emergency call because of a business deal, had built his empire on pharmaceutical middlemen who made healthcare inaccessible to people like Adiz's mother. This inheritance was his apology, his penance, his desperate bid to matter in a way that outlasted his name on a building. "Okay," she whispered, kissing his knuckles. "Okay, I promise." The relief that washed over his face was almost physical. Adiz adjusted his ventilator settings, and slowly, his oxygen climbed back. 78%, 81%, 85%. The alarm stopped screaming, but she could see the truth in his eyes. This wasn't a scare. Soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, there would be an alarm that no adjustments could silence. "Sing," he whispered. "Please." So she did. "Neka nwa mbaise, onye kagiema." The Igbo lullaby wove through the mechanical sounds of dying. And for a moment, Ji-hoon's expression softened, eased, found something like peace. "I love you," he said suddenly, clearly, in the brief window between ventilator cycles. Adiz's breath stopped. I know it's crazy. 23 days. But I love you. And when I'm gone," he swallowed. "Remember that someone saw you, really saw you, and loved what he saw." She was crying again, couldn't seem to stop. "I love you too," she confessed, the words ripping free from the careful walls she'd built. "And I hate that we met like this, that we only get days instead of decades, that I'm going to lose you right when I—" She couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Ji-hoon's hand, trembling but determined, pulled her down until their foreheads touched. "Then we make these days count," he said softly. "Every second, every breath, we make it matter." Outside, Busan glittered in the late afternoon light. Somewhere in that city, Park Jae-sung was preparing his legal assault. The media was sharpening their knives. The inheritance battle was coiling like a storm. But in room 604 of the penthouse that had become their world, Adiz and Ji-hoon found what both had thought impossible: love in the shadow of death, purpose in the face of ending, hope, fragile but fierce, that somehow what they'd built in 23 days would outlast the inevitable. "I'll fight for it," Adiz promised, holding him as gently as she could. "For your legacy, for what you wanted to build. Not my legacy." Ji-hoon's eyes held hers with burning intensity. "Yours. Build something better than I ever could." And in that moment, Adizi Nwosu, refugee, illegal immigrant, woman who'd survived things that should have broken her, made a vow. She would take Park Ji-hoon's billions, and she would use them to save every person the world had deemed disposable, starting with herself. What she didn't know was that making that promise had just painted the biggest target on her back, and that Park Jae-sung was already loading the gun. Park Ji-hoon died on a Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m., with Adizi holding his hand and sunlight painting the ocean gold. His last words were, "Thank you for making me matter." Then the monitors flatlined, and the man who'd built an empire worth $3.2 trillion slipped away as quietly as smoke. Adiz didn't scream, didn't fall apart. She'd known this was coming, had prepared for it the way she'd prepared for every loss since her father's murder. But what she wasn't prepared for was what happened 90 minutes later. The police arrived first, then the lawyers, then Park Jae-sung, flanked by men in expensive suits and expressions sharp as knives. "Miss Nwosu," the lead detective said in careful English, "we need you to come with us. There are questions about Mr. Park's death." Adize stood in the doorway to Ji-hoon's room, his body still warm on the bed behind her, and felt ice flood her veins. "Questions?" Her voice came out steady, detached. "He had ALS, terminal diagnosis. Multiple physicians can confirm." "We're aware," Jae-sung interrupted, stepping forward. His eyes were red. From crying or rage, she couldn't tell. "But my father was supposed to have weeks left. Suddenly he dies the day after changing his will to leave everything to you." He smiled, cold and vicious.
Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? You think I killed him? The accusation was so absurd it almost made her laugh. Almost. I think you're an illegal immigrant who seduced a dying man and manipulated him into signing over a fortune. Jae-sung pulled out his phone, showing her photos. I have evidence you're wanted in Nigeria for questioning related to your father's anti-government activities. Evidence of the $200 million you pressured my father to pay. Evidence of... Enough. Everyone turned. Lee Tae-ho stood in the hallway, his expression colder than Adaizi had ever seen it. Miss Nwosu isn't going anywhere without counsel present, Lee said flatly. And before you make accusations, Park Jae-sung, I suggest you read the medical reports Dr. Yang filed yesterday. Your father's diaphragm function dropped to 12%. He was expected to die within 48 hours regardless of Miss Nwosu's presence. Fuck your medical reports. Jae-sung's voice shook with rage. She stole my inheritance. 3 trillion won that should have been yours. Lee's smile was sharp. You, who threw your fiancé downstairs? Who your father paid $800 million to keep out of prison? You think you have moral high ground here? Jae-sung lunged. 2 of the lawyers grabbed him. But the damage was done. The detective stepped between them, hand on his weapon. Everyone calm down. His eyes found Adai's. Miss Nwosu, you're not under arrest. But we do need a statement about your immigration status, about the money transfers, about how my father was a journalist who exposed government corruption and was murdered for it. Adaizi's voice cut like glass. About how I was 13 when soldiers burned our house. How I spent 3 years in refugee camps before scraping together enough money to pay smugglers. About how I've spent every day since terrified of deportation while working 16-hour shifts to keep my family alive. The room went silent. That's what you want to know? She looked at Jae-sung, at the police, at the lawyers circling like vultures. Fine, arrest me, deport me, take the money. I don't care anymore. Make sure whatever's left after legal fees goes to Chukwudi for medical school. And tell Grandmother Park... Her voice cracked. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise to Ji-hoon. She started toward the door. Wait. The voice was elderly, female, accented English but crystal clear. Grandmother Park stood in the hallway, leaning on her cane, her eyes sharp as obsidian. You're not going anywhere, child. She moved past the police, past Jae-sung's sputtering rage, directly to Adai's. My grandson made his choice, and I'm going to make sure it stands. Grandmother, Jae-sung started. Be silent. She didn't even look at him. You disgrace this family with your greed. Ji-hoon knew exactly what he was doing. And if his final act was to give his fortune to someone who actually gave a damn whether he lived or died, then that's his right. She turned to the detective. My grandson died of a disease that's been killing him for 2 years. Any suggestion otherwise is slander, and I will personally fund a lawsuit against anyone who says differently. But the will, Jae-sung tried again, was legal, witnessed, recorded, and executed by Lee Tae-ho, the best inheritance attorney in South Korea. Grandmother Park's smile was steel wrapped in silk. You want to fight this? Go ahead. Spend the next decade in court while Miss Nwosu uses Ji-hoon's money to actually help people. Or, she paused, accept the $500 million Ji-hoon left you as severance and walk away. $500 million? Jae-sung's voice climbed. I should have gotten... nothing. Grandmother Park's eyes blazed. You should have gotten nothing. The fact that Ji-hoon was generous enough to leave you anything shows more kindness than you ever showed him. The detective cleared his throat. Mrs. Park, if there's no evidence of foul play... There isn't. Lee handed him a file folder. Complete medical records. Video-recorded testimony from Mr. Park taken 3 weeks ago establishing his sound mind and clear intentions. Signed affidavits from 6 physicians. And a letter to the Korean immigration authorities requesting permanent residency for Miss Nwosu based on humanitarian grounds. The detective flipped through the documents, his expression shifting from suspicion to resignation. This seems comprehensive. He looked at Adai's. Miss Nwosu, You're free to go, but I recommend you stay in Seoul until the inheritance is formally processed. She'll be staying at my home, Grandmother Park announced. Under my protection, anyone who has questions can direct them to my lawyers. Jae-sung's face went purple. You can't, I can. I'm doing it. And if you ever threaten this woman again… Grandmother Park's voice dropped to something cold and lethal. I'll make sure every business partner in Seoul knows exactly what kind of man you are, starting with that fiancé you assaulted. I'm sure she'd love to talk to the press now that the settlement's been voided. Jae-sung went white. Get out of my grandson's home, Grandmother Park said quietly. And pray a Days is more forgiving than I am. The police left. The lawyers scattered. And Jae-sung, furious, defeated, but not quite brave enough to challenge the woman who controlled half of Old Money Seoul, stormed out with one final venomous glare at Days. The door slammed. Silence. Days stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened, trying to comprehend that she wasn't being arrested, wasn't being deported, wasn't losing everything Ji-hoon had fought to give her. Thank you, she whispered to Grandmother Park. Don't thank me yet. The old woman's expression softened. The legal battle is just beginning. Jae-sung will challenge, so will others. But Lee is very good at his job. And I'm very good at destroying people who underestimate little old ladies. She moved to Ji-hoon's body, still lying peacefully on the bed, and placed a withered hand on his forehead, she said in Korean, her voice breaking. You found someone worth loving, someone worth saving. I'm proud of you. Then she turned to Addie's, and her eyes held something fierce and protective. Ji-hoon gave you money. I'm giving you something more valuable. Access. Connections. The kind of social power that will make anyone who tries to hurt you regret they were ever born. She paused. But you have to earn it. How? By doing what Ji-hoon asked. Use this fortune to be better than he was. Build something that matters. And when people ask how a Nigerian refugee ended up with $3 trillion, Grandmother Park smiled. You tell them Park Ji-hoon saw something in you that his own blood couldn't match. Humanity. Adaizi's vision blurred with tears, but she nodded. Over the next 3 weeks, the legal battle exploded across Korean media. The tabloids called her a gold digger, a seductress, a manipulator who'd preyed on a dying man. But Grandmother Park was true to her word. Every attack was met with counter-evidence. Every lawsuit was buried in paperwork. And when Jae-sung tried to claim his father had been mentally incompetent, Lee produced neurological assessments from 4 specialists confirming Ji-hoon's perfect cognitive function. The will stood, the inheritance transferred, and on the day the courts made it official, Daisy stood in Lee's office and looked at the bank statements that confirmed she was now worth $3.2 trillion. 3.2 trillion won. Enough to change the world. Or destroy herself, trying. What now? Lee asked quietly. Days thought of Ji-hoon, of his last words, of the promise she'd made to build something better. Now we get to work, she said. I want to establish a foundation for refugees, legal services for immigrants, education programs for… Already done. Lee handed her another folder. Ji-hoon prepared the paperwork before he died. The Park Ji-hoon Foundation for Humanitarian Medicine, endowment of $1 trillion, board of directors including yourself, Grandmother Park, and 3 human rights advocates. Her breath caught. He knew, Lee said softly. He knew you'd want to give it away. So he made it easier. Legal structures, tax exemptions, everything you need to start saving lives tomorrow. Days pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Ji-hoon had given her more than money. He'd given her purpose, a way to transform grief into grace, loss into legacy. There's one more thing, Lee said, pulling out a small box. He asked me to give you this. After. Inside, a simple gold ring and a note in Ji-hoon's
For making my last days
handwriting.
worth living.
For showing me what love should look like. Wear this and remember, you were never alone. Daisy slipped the ring on her finger and felt something inside her chest settle. Ji-hoon was gone, the man who'd seen her when the world looked away. who'd fought for her when she'd forgotten how to fight for herself. But his love, his faith in what she could become, would live on in every person she saved, every refugee she sheltered, every life she touched with the fortune he'd entrusted to her hands. "Thank you," she whispered to his memory, "for everything." And in that moment, Adazin Wosu, former refugee, illegal immigrant, woman who'd survived horrors that should have broken her, became something else entirely, a force of nature, a builder of hope, the kind of person Park Ji-hoon had always known she could be. The battle wasn't over. Jae-sung would attack again. The media would never let her forget her past. But Adaise had something they didn't: purpose, and the absolute certainty that the man she'd loved, however briefly, believed she deserved every one of the fortune he'd left behind. Now she just had to prove him right. 5 years later, the Park Ji-hoon Memorial Hospital rose from the heart of Lagos like a promise kept. 15 stories of gleaming glass and steel, surrounded by gardens that bloomed year-round with flowers from both Nigeria and Korea. A plaque by the entrance read in English, Igbo, and Korean, "In memory of a man who learned that love matters more than empires. May all who enter here find healing." Adaze stood on the rooftop garden, watching the sun set over the city that had been both her prison and her salvation, and allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. 5 years. 5 years since Ji-hoon had died in her arms, since she'd inherited a fortune that had nearly destroyed her, since she'd fought a legal battle that made headlines across 3 continents. The ring he'd given her still circled her finger, thinner now from the weight she'd lost during those first brutal months of fighting Jae-sung's endless lawsuits. But she'd won. Grandmother Park had made sure of it. And then the real work had begun. "Dr. Nwosu?" Adais turned. Her assistant, a bright-eyed Korean woman named Minji, who'd joined the foundation 3 years ago, stood in the doorway holding a tablet. Dr. Nwosu still felt strange, but after Grandmother Park had insisted she finish her medical degree, paid for by the foundation, completed at Seoul National University in record time, Adaze had become exactly what Ji-hoon had believed she could be: someone who saved lives instead of just bearing witness to death. "The delegation from Doctors Without Borders is here," Minji said, "and Dr. Yang is asking about the new wing." "Dr. Yang?" Adaise's eyebrows rose. "Our Dr. Yang? The one who told me people like me shouldn't touch people like him?" Minji's smile was sharp. "The very same. Apparently, when you control W3 trillion and build the most advanced medical facility in West Africa, even bigots decide you're worth respecting." It still surprised her sometimes. The sound of her own joy, the fact that she could laugh after everything she'd survived. "Tell him I'll meet with him tomorrow. Today is family." Minji nodded and disappeared. Family. The word had taken on new meaning over the past 5 years. Chukwudi emerged from the hospital's main entrance, now 20 years old and in his 3rd year of medical school at the University of Lagos. He'd shot up 6 inches, filled out, and lost the scared boy look he'd worn when Adaz had finally brought him to visit Ji-hoon's grave in Busan. "Sis!" he called in Igbo, waving. "Mama's asking when dinner is. She's convinced you're going to forget to eat again." Their mother sat in a wheelchair near the garden's fountain. A stroke 3 years ago had stolen the use of her legs, but not her spirit. She was deep in conversation with Grandmother Park, who visited Lagos twice a year and had essentially adopted Adaizi's entire family. "Your grandmother is telling my grandmother about the time you faced down Korean immigration with nothing but righteous anger," Chukwudi said, grinning. "I think they're becoming best friends. God help us all." But Adaizi's smile was soft. All of this was Ji-hoon's legacy, not just the hospital that provided free health care to 50,000 refugees annually, not just the schools they'd built across 3 countries, not just the legal clinic that had secured asylum for thousands of displaced people. The legacy was family, found family, built from grief and hope, and the absolute refusal to let trauma define them. Dr. Nwosu, Lee Tae-ho, appeared, still impeccably dressed, though his hair had gone gray at the temples. He'd become the foundation's chief operating officer, managing the W3 trillion with the same precision he'd once used to defend Ji-hoon's will. "There's someone who wants to meet you," he said quietly. Adiz followed him inside to a private conference room. A young woman sat there. Korean, early 20s, with scars on her face that looked like burns. This is Kim Seo-yeon, Lee said. She was trafficked from Korea to Thailand 5 years ago. Our foundation's anti-trafficking division just secured her release. Seo-yeon looked up, and Adiz saw herself reflected in those traumatized eyes, saw the same fear, the same hard-won survival. You saved me, Seo-yeon whispered in Korean. The lawyers you sent, the money for the legal fees. They said you knew what it was like to be property. Something cracked in Adiz's chest. I did, she said softly, sinking into the chair across from her. I survived cargo containers and debt and men who thought my body was currency. So yes, I know. They said, Seo-yeon's voice broke. They said you did this because someone saved you first. Adiz thought of Ji-hoon, of his hand finding hers in the dark, of the way he'd looked at her like she was human when the world said she was contraband. Someone showed me I was worth saving, she said, and I've spent every day since trying to pass that gift forward. Will I? Seo-yeon swallowed. Will I ever stop being afraid? I don't know. Adiz reached across the table, taking the girl's scarred hands in her own. I still wake up sometimes thinking I'm back in that cargo hold, still panic when I see police, but… She paused. You learn to carry the fear differently, to let it remind you that you survived, that you're stronger than what tried to break you. Seo-yeon nodded, tears streaming down her face. Stay here as long as you need, Adiz said. We have housing, counseling, job training, whatever you need to build a life worth living. Thank you, Seo-yeon whispered. Thank you, thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Park Ji-hoon. Adiz smiled. He's the one who taught me that money is only valuable if you use it to dignify human life. After Seo-yeon left, escorted by counselors who would help her navigate the trauma, Adiz returned to the rooftop. The sun had set. Lagos glittered beneath her like fallen stars, and for the first time in 5 years, Adiz allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd accomplished. The Park Ji-hoon Foundation operated in 12 countries, employed 3,000 people, had saved an estimated 200,000 lives through medical care, legal services, and humanitarian intervention. $3.2 trillion, carefully invested, now generated enough returns to be self-sustaining in perpetuity. Ji-hoon's gift would outlive them all. He'd be proud, you know. Adiz turned. Grandmother Park stood in the doorway, leaning on her cane but still sharp-eyed as ever. Would he? Adiz's voice came out smaller than intended. Child, you've built something my grandson could never have imagined. You took his guilt and his money and his desperate final wish, and you transformed it into hope. The old woman crossed to her, placing a gentle hand on Adiz's cheek. You didn't just honor his memory, you redeemed it. I miss him, Adiz confessed. Every single day. Good. Grandmother Park's smile was bittersweet. Missing means it mattered. And besties, what you had with Ji-hoon, however brief, was the kind of love that reshapes the world. The comments section had been brutal, inspiring, transformative. She's a gold digger. She's a hero. She stole from a dying man. She saved thousands of lives. Adiz had stopped reading after a while. Let the haters hate and the supporters celebrate. There's something else. All that mattered was the work, Grandmother Park said quietly. Lee found the last video, the one Ji-hoon recorded the day before he died. Adiz's breath caught. What? He wanted you to watch it on the 5th anniversary. Said you'd need it by then. The old woman smiled. I think he knew you'd be exhausted, questioning if it was worth it. Wondering if I was good enough, Adiz whispered. Exactly. They went to Adiz's office, a simple room overlooking the hospital's main entrance. Lee had the laptop ready. Ji-hoon appeared on screen, so thin he was barely recognizable. But his eyes, those dark, sharp eyes that had first seen her crying, burned with fierce intensity. Adiz, he began, his voice mechanical but warm. If you're watching this, I've been dead for 5 years. And knowing you, you've probably saved a few 100,000 lives, built half a dozen facilities, and still think you're not doing enough. Adaizi's vision blurred with tears. So, I'm going to tell you something you need to hear. Ji-hoon leaned forward, and even through the camera, his presence was commanding. You were never broken. You were bent, shaped by trauma into something stronger than steel. And the fact that you survived what you survived, and still have compassion left, still want to save people, makes you the bravest person I've ever met. I gave you money. But you gave me something more valuable. You gave me a reason to believe humanity wasn't completely lost. His voice cracked. So whatever you're building with my billions, whatever empire of hope and healing you've created, know that I see you. I'm proud of you, and I love you more than I ever loved this fortune I'm leaving behind. He paused, smiled, and one more thing. I know you're terrified of letting anyone get close again. Terrified of loving someone and losing them, but Adaizi, you deserve to be loved, fully, wildly, by someone who sees your scars and loves you more, not less. So find that person, let yourself be happy, and when you do, his expression softened. Name your first child Ji-hoon. Or don't. I don't care. Just live, really live, in a way I never learned to until you taught me. The video ended. Adaiz sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, feeling like Ji-hoon had just reached across 5 years and reminded her why she was fighting. Not for guilt, not for penance, for love, for the belief that every person, refugee or billionaire, broken or whole, deserved dignity. You okay? Grandmother Park asked softly. I think so. Adaiz wiped her eyes. I think I'm finally exactly where I'm supposed to be. That night, at the Foundation's 5th anniversary gala, Adaiz stood before 500 donors, survivors, and supporters and told her story. The cargo container, the trafficking, the death and fear and desperate scramble for survival. And then, Ji-hoon. He saw me when I was invisible, she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. Loved me when I thought I was unlovable, and gave me the resources to prove that broken things can be rebuilt into something beautiful. So tonight we celebrate not just 5 years of work. We celebrate every life saved, every refugee granted asylum, every person told they matter. She raised her glass. To Park Ji-hoon, who taught me that true wealth is measured in the lives you touch, not the money you hoard. The room exploded in that applause. Moment, Adaizi Nwosu, former refugee, illegal immigrant, woman who'd survived what should have killed her, felt something she hadn't allowed herself in 5 years. Peace, not the absence of grief. She'd carried Ji-hoon's memory forever, but peace in knowing she'd kept her promise, built something worthy of his faith, transformed his billions into a legacy that saved lives instead of accumulating dust in offshore accounts. Later, as guests mingled and music played, Chukwudi found her on the balcony. There's someone who wants to meet you, he said, grinning. He's a doctor, Korean, works with our trauma program, and his smile widened. He's been asking about you for 6 months. Adaizi's heart stuttered. Chukwudi, I know. You're not ready. You're still grieving. You're married to the work. He squeezed her shoulder. But Ji-hoon literally just told you to live. So maybe, just maybe, let yourself have one conversation. See what happens. Before she could protest, Chukwudi disappeared. A man approached, early 30s, kind eyes, the tired smile of someone who'd spent too many hours in surgery. Dr. Nwosu? He said in accented English. I'm Dr. Kang Min-ho. I've been working in your orthopedic wing for 3 months, and I wanted to say thank you. It's extraordinary. For what you're building here. Adaizi looked at him, really looked, saw someone who understood the work, who chose healing over profit, who looked at her not as a wealthy benefactor or a tragic backstory, but as a fellow human fighting the same war against suffering. Would you like to get coffee? Min-ho asked, almost shy. I know you're probably too busy, but coffee sounds perfect, Adaizi heard herself say. And as they walked back into the gala together, Adaizi felt Ji-hoon's presence like a whisper on the wind. Live. really live. So she would. She'd honor Ji-hoon's memory by building the foundation into something that outlasted them all. And she'd honor his love by letting herself believe she deserved to be happy, not despite her past, because of it, because she'd survived, and in surviving, had become exactly the kind of person the world needed, someone who'd been broken and learned to heal others, someone who'd been saved and chose to save in return, someone who proved every single day that love, real, sacrificial, transformative love, could reshape the world. 5 years ago, Park Ji-hoon had given a Daesin Wosu his billions, but the real gift was the belief that she was worth it. And as she stood in the ballroom surrounded by the lives she'd touched, the family she'd built, the legacy that would outlive them all, Adais finally, fully believed it too. The end.